Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Return of the Monarchs, Demystifying the Butterfly's Journey, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Charlie Reinertsen. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Over to you, Charlie.
Thanks for the intro, Rob, and thanks to all of you for joining me this afternoon. I'm calling in from Saranac Lake in the Adirondack Park, and it's currently snowing. And today we're going to talk about a creature who escapes this snow, who was here probably in August, early September. They were getting some nectar from the plants just outside my window, and then they were flying all the way down to a very small area in the high elevation Oyamel fir forest of Mexico. And so we'll be tracing that monarch butterfly migration today and talking about monarch butterfly ecology, learning about that, and also taking a quick look at Natural Habitat Adventures itinerary to be able to view this incredible migration. So just to show you what we'll be talking about today, I'll introduce myself, talk to you a little bit about what I do, and then we'll look at monarch butterfly ecology. After that, we'll take a look at conservation status of this species and some efforts that are being put in place to be able to help protect this migration. And finally, we'll look at the trip itinerary with the Kingdom of the Monarchs led by Natural Habitat Adventures and World Wildlife Fund. So just a little bit about me. I'm an expedition leader for Natural Habitat Adventures. I'm also a professional photographer and marketing professional. And I run my own business, Two Line Studio, and that provides me with the flexibility so that I can guide 4 times a year, both in the monarch migration trip as well as the Yellowstone and Grand Teton trip out west. So it's just an amazing opportunity to partner with these organizations who are both connecting people to the wildlife that I care so deeply about, and also actually driving funds to support those conservation efforts. So it's really fun to be able to travel through to different areas and take incredible pictures of and try and inspire people to conserve and protect our natural world. I've worked with a lot of different clients, and I write and do photography and video, and most recently climate solutions exhibit in the Adirondacks, which brought me to this part of the world where I've now set up my home. And I first got into photography when I was researching softshell turtles, and I met this cast of characters, and I was trying to document my work and document these amazing animals that I was spending time with in the Mississippi watershed in Minnesota. And ultimately, we were able to highlight this species, which is Apollon mutica, with a smooth softshell turtle, as a turtle that needs additional help to be able to ensure that it can still persist at its northernmost range, which is in northern Minnesota. And these turtles had significantly lower genetic diversity than the spiny softshell turtles. And so we were actually able to say, look, we need to start looking at their habitat and protecting more of it. Which is a really cool research project. And it also, when I got to that phase of communicating the project to the public and to the Department of Natural Resources, it started to get me thinking about, gosh, I love research and I love the field of biology, but I'm really passionate about trying to share that work with a broader audience. And that kicked off a career in science communications. But here's what we came for today. Let's talk about these half-gram, 4-inch long insects, the monarch butterfly. To be able to understand the monarch butterfly, you have to understand its life cycle. And I find every time that I go through this life cycle and I think about it, it always surprises me, and I always learn something more as I'm reading about it and discussing it. So even if this is a review, I hope you kind of learn something that you might not have known before. So the adult butterfly lays an egg, and it lays its egg on a milkweed plant. Milkweed is a particular type of plant that has a defense against herbivory, against insects or predators eating its leaves. And those defenses are twofold. The first defense is a chemical defense, and it is a cardiac glycoside that literally causes heart failure in insects and animals that try to eat it. The second defense that these plants have are this latex, and it's a gooey, gluey substance that they exude and that it carries that cardiac glycoside. So if a bug takes a bite of this leaf, it oozes this goo and it's laced with all these toxins. And what's amazing is that the monarch butterfly has evolved to be able to process those toxins and also arm themselves with them. So they actually have adapted to be able to process the toxins enough and to be able to sequester them in tissues so that if another predator tries to eat the monarch butterfly, they get sick and they can regurgitate it. You know, even if a blue jay gets just a little bite of the wing, that will cause the blue jay to throw up. And there have been studies that look at this. And the predators then learn, because of that orange color, they learn to avoid that monarch butterfly. So all of that context to say, monarch butterflies are entirely dependent on the milkweed plant, and they lay their eggs there because the caterpillar feeds exclusively on milkweed. And this picture here shows the scale of an egg. On the left, you have just a little pinprick point, and that's the size of an egg on a milkweed leaf. And on the right, you're seeing a zoomed in, really close macro shot of that egg. And here is what those milkweed plants look like. They come in a number of different varieties, different species of milkweed. And there's this great speciation of milkweed. So there are a few species that live in the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly, which is in Mexico. And we'll talk more about that. But as you head north, these plants speciated or evolved into different species. So there are like 10 to 15 species that exist in North America. And there's a ton of milkweed in North America. And that's really important about the evolution of monarchs and the creation of this migration, which we'll get into in a moment as well. So just getting back to that life cycle, the first job of that little caterpillar is to eat, and that is its only job. And the caterpillar is faced, even though these caterpillars have learned to be able to, adapted to be able to eat milkweed, it's still a really tough task. And so the first thing that they do is they eat their egg. So right here, this is a picture, incredible picture of a little larva eating its egg. And that's the most nutritious meal it can get before it starts eating all the toxins that are in the milkweed. Next step, it starts chewing the milkweed leaf, but it's not simple. The majority of eggs that are laid, those caterpillars die because they're trying to eat this very toxic sludge from the milkweed plant. And so here you're seeing in this far left image, the instars, which are the growth phases of that larva before they shed their exoskeleton and go into their next growth phase. And so the whole time they're feasting on this milkweed, but they have a few different tactics to be able to try and survive their feeding that they have to do. So the first tactic is to release pressure. So remember, that milkweed has this latex that it oozes out of any kind of a cut to its tissue. And so the caterpillar will actually make a little incision on the leaf and they'll allow it to drain. And once it's drained a little portion of the leaf, they'll go in and they'll eat that portion of the leaf. And these little tiny caterpillars, it's really easy for them to get glued up mouth parts. And so when that latex, as they're drinking it and eating the leaf, it has the potential to freeze their mouth shut and they'll starve to death because they can't eat. And so it's a tough life being a caterpillar. They need to eat as much as they can. And based on how many nutrients they get, that will determine how healthy of an adult they're able to metamorphose into. So we go through 5 instars where they shed that exoskeleton, grow, and continue to feed on this milkweed plant before they start to shift into a chrysalis. The other thing I'll point out here as we're looking at this image is that not only is the adult butterfly orange and bright colored, the caterpillar itself is also brightly colored. It has that really bright yellow, and that helps to warn predators, again, hey, I'm toxic, don't eat me, because they too are sequestering the toxins in their tissues, and that prevents predators from eating them. Or if a predator eats them, they get very sick and then avoid monarch butterflies generally. So we've gone from egg to larva, and we've gone all the way through all 5 instars or growth phases of that pupa. And now the caterpillar goes into a J hang, where it affixes itself to a branch or sometimes a ledge of a building or something like that, with a really sticky glue that they produce. And then they hang upside down and slowly metamorphose into a chrysalis. So they form a chrysalis. And inside there, once they form that chrysalis, it's pretty amazing. All of their cells essentially go to goo. And then they transition and they start to reorient into the adult monarch butterfly. Tons of scientists and researchers are trying to understand how this process of metamorphosis is happening, because it has a lot of implications for medical mysteries or even breakthroughs that we could have in treating human health. So one other thing to point out here, these chrysalises are beautiful, and this picture doesn't quite show it, but there's this gold rim around on the top, and then these jewels of gold down on the bottom. And it's believed that that is actually an adaptation to both camouflage them within a tree canopy and to make it look like there are water droplets on the leaf to help them blend in. And they end up looking like little jewels. And here is a picture from egg on the leaf through the 5 instars into the chrysalis and then emerging as an adult. So this process itself, from egg and all the way through the 5th instar, takes about a month. And then once they emerge as an adult, they live for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4, and then they lay their eggs and start the next generation. And that is the typical life cycle of a monarch butterfly. Something different happens when they migrate, and we'll get there in a minute, just to tease that a little bit. So their full lifespan in a typical season would be about 1.5 to 2 months from egg all the way until they mate and then die as an adult. And the other thing to point out here is that the temperature that they are living in actually helps determine how quickly they move through those phases. So if it's cooler, it's going to take them longer to develop, and if it's warmer, they'll be able to move through those stages a little bit more quickly. So the monarch butterfly is a tropical species, and that's really important because it helps us understand their migration. So the monarch butterfly evolved in the tropics. They first speciated in the tropics. And you can actually find them all the way around the world. You can find them in North America, South America, parts of Africa, and into Asia. And so when we talk about the monarch butterfly being endangered, it's actually the monarch butterfly migration that is endangered, because even if we lose the migration entirely, this species is going to continue to persist throughout the world in other places. It is just the migration that we're concerned about right now. We'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later. So the species evolved in the tropics and depends on milkweed. Now, here are the migratory populations that we currently know about. One of them is a smaller migration that happens in California, and the monarch butterflies congregate in the winter in one particular or a couple particular areas on the coastline. When you're east of the Rocky Mountains, all of the monarch butterflies from the Rockies until the eastern seaboard and all the way up until into southern Canada, all of those butterflies, when it comes September, October, they migrate down to one particular place in Michoacan, Mexico. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. But why did this migration even come to be? There are a few theories. One theory is that, as I was talking about earlier, there are fewer species of milkweed in Mexico, and there are many more species of milkweed in the North America that's further north. So you look at the United States and into southern Canada, there are many more milkweed species. So the monarch butterfly is kind of chasing food availability further north as the season warms up. The other factor here is that monarch butterflies cannot tolerate cold. A lot of butterflies, other species of butterfly, will overwinter in leaf litter, and they'll find little places where they can just essentially freeze through the winter and then get going in the springtime again, which is on its own pretty amazing. These creatures do not have freeze tolerance. If it stays wet and cold for too long, but below the freezing point, these creatures will die. And so that is part of the drive behind chasing food as it warms up and food becomes available, and then returning back to southern latitudes where they can stay warm throughout the winter. The other theory, both in why monarch butterflies would move north as well as return south, is because of parasite avoidance. So there are a number of parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs in developing larvae of monarch butterfly, and then they eat them from the inside out. They're really terrifying species. They're also native. They're not an invasive species. And they've evolved to be able to take advantage of this food source. And so it's believed that if monarch butterflies were to stay in one place and just reproduce and stay in that place, parasite populations could get really big and cause some pretty big problems for these creatures. But if they can migrate generationally, they leave the parasites in the dust, is one of the theories behind migration. So here are the migratory pathways that we're talking about. On the far left of this image, you're seeing the summer and winter grounds of the monarch butterfly that migrates in California. And then east of the Rocky Mountains, you're seeing that funnel, which is all of the monarch butterflies from the Rocky Mountains to the eastern seaboard who in the springtime are generationally hopping north. And then the last generation, as the season is turning, those butterflies fly all the way to Mexico and spend the entire winter in this one particular area of forest. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we'll come back to this graphic because I find that, especially when I was first learning about this, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. So just to walk through it one more time, we're looking at this little orange strip, the monarch overwintering grounds. And that's essentially tracking along the transvolcanic mountains in southern, central Mexico. That's where the monarch butterflies are spending their winters at 10,000 feet elevation in the Oyamel fir forest. In the springtime, when it warms up, the butterflies start flying north and they start laying their eggs in this blue triangle here in generation 1. And those eggs hatch, the caterpillars feed, they go into chrysalis, those butterflies emerge, and then they fly further north. So generations 2 and 3 are extending through the Midwest and into the southern eastern seaboard. And then it happens again, and they go further north into the Midwest where the Great Lakes region is, and through where I am now in the Adirondacks, and then into generations 4 and 5, they're reaching southern Canada. And then in September, it starts to get cold and these butterflies detect a seasonal shift. So I like to think of monarch butterflies a little bit like a Mars rover. Mars rover is obviously equipped with tons of sensory equipment to be able to learn as much about Mars as possible. So temperature, thermometers, soil samples, all these different tech things. So I kind of picture this little 4-inch big insect is outfitted with an unbelievable array of sensors that is allowing it to collect a lot of information about its environment so that it can then be driven to change its behavior in its environment. And you're hearing me be a little bit careful about how I'm speaking. I'm trying to bridge between speaking as a scientist who are trying to be objective and not essentially put human feeling or emotions onto an animal, because it's hard when you learn about what the monarch butterfly does. It's hard not to impart think of them as an animal that thinks, feels, and makes decisions. But essentially, these butterflies are detecting information, and it triggers a change in their phenotype, in the type of body that they have. A number of animals have this and have this ability, but in this case, the butterflies start to taste the chemicals in the plant, and they know that those plants are starting to die back. And this is also how female butterflies will scratch the leaf of a plant and taste the chemicals and decide if it's a suitable plant for their larva, because they don't want a milkweed plant with tons of toxins. They want just the right amount of toxins for their progeny to be able to get a defense mechanism without killing them. And so they also have the ability to taste the chemicals in a plant. They are sensing the temperature, and they are also sensing sunlight. So 2 ways there. They are detecting how much light is in a given day. So as those days shorten, that is triggering a biological change in their bodies. And then as the angle of the sun gets to a certain degree, that triggers them to fly south. So that's why I talk about these animals being a little bit like a Mars rover, because they are detecting all of this information and it triggers them to be able to change. And they enter what is called reproductive diapause. So in reproductive diapause, all of those seasonal triggers cause them to shut down their reproductive organs. They increase their fat storage, and then their lifespan jumps by up to 7 months. So remember, like they used to live 1 to 2 months in their whole life cycle. And then when these things happen, when we get plant death, the days are shorter and the sun is at a certain angle, they go into reproductive diapause, they have more fat storage, and they quadruple their lifespan, which is wild. So obviously we're studying the heck out of the species to be able to figure out how are they doing this and what can we learn from them to be able to apply it to modern medicine. So how in heck are they getting to this little location? Because when we look at this migration, back to this image, they are pinpointing a very tiny geographic area in Michoacan, Mexico. And not only are they pinpointing a very particular location, but these individual butterflies have never been there. So they have programmed into their DNA the ability to locate somewhere that they have never been. And how they do that through a number of mechanisms. So remember, this is where that Mars rover concept comes into play. So they have a circadian clock. A lot of animals have a circadian rhythm, which is essentially hormone levels that are driven by the amount of sunlight that we get in a day. So we actually have a circadian clock. We're not very in tune with it, but we do have one. So monarch butterflies have one, and it by detecting how much light is coming into their eyes, they are able to determine roughly the time of day, essentially. And then they have what's called an internal compass. So they're able to see the position of the sun, and they know relative directions, and or at least they've evolved to be able to understand which direction they need to travel in this migration based on the position of the sun. And then the next one that biologists are studying that's fascinating is magnetic field detection. And this is a question mark because it's not fully confirmed yet, but monarch butterflies on their wings have a deposit of magnetite, and it's believed that that deposit allows them to be able to detect magnetic fields and navigate using that. And that becomes really interesting because their wintering grounds are in the transvolcanic mountain range. And that particular mountain range has an anomaly when it comes to magnetic field. These mountains have a ton of heavy metals because they're volcanic. And because of those heavy metals, it literally disrupts the typical magnetic fields. And the monarch butterflies, it's believed that they are detecting that disruption, and it helps them hone in on the exact location as they get close. Another trick that they're using, not trick, but adaptation, is pheromones. So as they get closer and closer to their location, into the forest where their ancestors have lived, they're actually using what are called pheromones to hone in on the literal tree that their ancestors chose to roost in. And so those pheromones are present in the ecosystem. They're chemicals that animals release. We have pheromones. We're not able to detect them consciously, but we do release pheromones and detect them. And some animals are more in tune with their organ that helps detect pheromones, and monarch butterflies are one of them. So they're able to actually smell. And the other last sense that they're using is actually sight. It's believed that they're using geographical markers to be able to help hone in on the final stage of their journey, which to me is still a mystery because they've never been there before. So I'm not really sure how much that can help. So let's head down to the wintering grounds. And today's presentation is actually very timely because these monarch butterflies are arriving in their wintering grounds now. And actually the day that they often arrive is the 1st of November, 2nd of November, and that's timed very closely with the Day of the Dead, which is goes back to Mayan religion. And it's believed that the monarch butterflies are the returning souls of the dead. And we've also estimated that at a certain point in time, it's possible that there were billions of monarch butterflies migrating to this very particular region of Mexico. Today, there are 250 million individuals that make their way down. But this place that they're going is the Transvolcanic mountain range. It's in Michoacan, Mexico. And it's at about 10,000 feet in elevation in the Oyamel fir forests. This migration, as we just discussed, the return of the monarch butterflies was noted by ancient cultures and peoples, and the Mexican people have known about this migration, but the scientific community didn't quite know about this migration until the 70s. And in the 70s, there were researchers in the United States who were doing a tag recapture study. So they're actually putting little stickers on butterflies that they found in the summer in September. And then they were doing a mail service. Essentially, they put a call out, they put an ad in the paper, essentially, for people, if they saw a butterfly with a tag, to record the number that's on the tag that would identify that individual. And let the researchers know where they found it. And this helped identify that monarch butterflies were not overwintering, they were going somewhere. And eventually it helped them hone in on Mexico at large, and eventually down to Michoacan, and eventually down to the very particular place where they migrate. And if you may have seen this cover of National Geographic, this was published in the 70s. And it announced the discovery of the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly, again, by the scientific community, because this was known by people in Mexico for many, many years before the scientific community finally figured out what was happening. So today, there are a couple dozen locations in Michoacan and the Estado de Mexico where monarch butterflies exist. And these are all within the protected area of the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve. So this yellow area on the map is called the buffer zone, and then you can't see it very well, but this green area in the center of that yellow map, that is the core zone. And so there are different protections placed on those different areas by the Mexican government. And we'll touch on this a little bit more, but World Wildlife Fund was really integral in helping to assist in getting these areas protected. And we'll talk a little bit more about how these areas are protected today. But before we do that, I would love to stop sharing my screen and pull up a video to give you a sense of what does it feel like to be in the particular place where these monarch butterflies are spending their winter. So I'll stop sharing this screen, and it might take me a couple tries here. but I'm going to share my screen on a video if I can. It might make me, I'm just going to stop sharing and then grab a new tab. All right, here we go. All right, that is showing. And when I'm done with this, I'll drop a link to this video in the chat. It's possible that it's not going to do a great job buffering, so it might be a little bit halted on your view. But this is footage that I took in the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly last winter in February, and we'll get that rolling. So here you're actually seeing clusters of butterflies on the branches of the Oyamel fir. And here you're getting a shot at what it looks like when it's a cold day, where the butterflies haven't quite started flying yet. There are a lot of nectar species in the wintering grounds, and this is what it looks like when it's warm and sunny and the butterflies are flying around. And this is what everybody's crossing their fingers for when they come, because it's amazing to see the butterflies when they're on the branches and literally weighing down the tree branch with the collective weight of thousands of butterflies. And then when the sun hits those clusters of butterflies, they actually start to cascade off in rivers of butterflies and start to fly around, and you feel like you're in a snow globe of butterflies. And towards the end of the season, when these butterflies are starting to think of heading north, they start mating and will actually fly together as they're mating. And it's a pretty phenomenal experience. So the other video that, just while we're here, I want to show, this is footage taken in my backyard. And I'm very fortunate to have this as my backyard, but this is a milkweed garden. And also a lot of pollinator species, local native plants. And this is a haven for monarch butterflies from July into August into September. And we'll see multiple generations of monarch butterflies here, as well as a lot of other species who feed on milkweed plants that you're seeing here, like the dogbane beetle and milkweed beetle, a lot of different amazing creatures that also have the ability to process that toxin, the cardiac glycosides that are in milkweed plants. So this is really starting to show just how many species benefit from monarch butterfly protections. So that's another species we just saw, the dogweed plant. And dogbane is another in the milkweed family, so it also has those cardiac glycosides in its latex, but it's an important nectar plant for monarch butterflies and other species. Here you're seeing a swallowtail feeding there, and then this is a little egg of a monarch butterfly, and this is a pupa feeding on the milkweed leaf. And these creatures are constantly eating, and they leave a lot of frass. That's a fancy word for butterfly poop. That individual just had a deposited frass on that leaf. And as you can see, when these caterpillars are in their early stages, they are the leaf structure itself has a lot of hairs on it, and those hairs are kind of the first defensive structure that they need to get past. And so they mow down those hairs and then they start feeding on the leaf. And this is just giving a little more context for where I am and where I'm calling in from the beautiful Adirondack Park. And that's a shot at just how vast the spreading dogbane is that these butterflies are feeding on. So I'll just stop sharing that screen. It'll just take me a minute to get back to this this presentation here. And I want to see if I can leave some time for questions too. So we'll start moving through this pretty quickly. I get excited about these butterflies, so I get a little bit lost in time. But let's see here. It looks like it's paused. Let me press play. See if we can get this shared. Still seems like it's taken a minute. Oh, there we go. Maybe it's closer now. All right, we're back in. So this image is taken on the trail as you're heading up to go look at the butterflies, and you're actually seeing in this image butterflies in the frame. So all those dots in the sky are monarch butterflies. And when you start to look around the forest, when you really get to that final stage of being able to be in the exact place where all these butterflies are congregating, you start to notice that everything is covered. The bark is covered of these trees, the branches are covered, and all of the activity of these butterflies is very much driven by temperature. So as it warms up, the butterflies are more active, and as it cools down, they cluster into the branches. So here's a cloudy and cool picture, and if you look closely and kind of look deeply into this image, you'll see all of the branches weighed down by these clusters of monarch butterflies. Really amazing. No matter what the weather is doing, it's amazing to see what these creatures are doing in response to it. And here's what happens when it's sunny and warm and they get on the move. So what's interesting too about this wintering ground situation is that as these butterflies are living and using up energy, they're eating up their fat stores. And there's this interesting balance where as the temperature gets warm, they're ectotherms, they're getting their heat from the environment. They're at risk of getting too hot. So even on a 50-degree day at 10,000 feet in elevation, if they get too hot, they actually have to do things to cool themselves down. So they go and they find water. Here they are at a stream bed, drinking water, and they also fly. So flight for monarch butterflies is very efficient. They're gliding animals, and so they actually fly up and then they catch a current and then they just drift back down, and that actually helps them cool down. There are a couple predators who can actually handle the toxins that are in monarch butterflies, so occasionally you'll see, like this one, a bite mark taken out of that wing. The couple different birds and a mouse that actually feed on these. If you think about it, if you can be adapted to be able to feed on that toxic animal, you have a really good food source through the winter, because there are 250 million of these individuals right now, and historically many more. And in the early spring or late winter, early spring, we start to have mating, and this is actually, the male is actually gifting a spermatophore. So it's sperm as well as a huge fat deposit that helps power the female butterflies further north, because towards the end of the winter, they're starting to make that generational migration all the way into southern Canada. So a lot of information to digest, and there's so much more that we could have gone into, but I just want to wrap up by taking a look at the Natural Habitat Adventures itinerary if you were to go and try and see the wintering grounds of the monarch butterfly. Just a moment. So these trips are round trip out of Mexico City. So you fly into Mexico City, and I encourage you, if you do this trip, take a little time, because Mexico City is incredible. There's so many things to see, amazing art, and also places that you can visit on your own before the trip starts. Once we gather for the first night of the trip, we get to know each other. Then we load into coach buses and we travel out to Angongeo. And that's about a 4-hour coach bus ride. And once we get to Angongeo on day one, we actually take a covered truck up the mountain, up dirt roads, and then we hop on a horseback ride, and it's about another hour on horseback. And then we get higher in elevation, and then we hike at that point. And depending on where the butterflies are in the forest, because they like to congregate together and they kind of shift around the forest as the season goes on, we will hike usually, you can't depend on how long, but usually about 30 minutes to an hour. to get up to the location where they are. And then we get to be right in the middle of monarch butterflies and observe what they're doing on that particular day. In the evening, we make our way back to Angangeo, and that's our home base. That's where we're staying. A number of different local hotels in the area that we partner with that are all amazing, have incredible staff. Everyone on this trip that we work with, both guides as well as hotel vendors and other folks that we partner with, all of the locals are just incredibly friendly and welcoming, and it goes a really long way. If you're able to learn a little bit of Spanish, it really goes a long way to getting to know some of the folks who are helping make this trip possible. So on the second day, we go to another reserve in the Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, which is the Sierra Cinque Reserve. And again, we would take a truck and then a horse, and then we would walk, hike to be able to get out to the butterflies. And we actually have lunch at Sierra Cinque, which is a really amazing, authentic meal, hopefully outside if it's nice weather. And then we spend a little time getting to know the town of Angangeo, which has an amazing history in both mining and forestry, and now ecotourism, because it's really embraced this idea that the monarch butterfly can drive both economic income and support livelihoods, and we can also support this species in one of the most amazing migrations that we currently know about. Day 3, we head back to El Rosario. That's one of the largest congregations of monarch butterflies, so we do like to go there twice on this itinerary. And so you'll notice in a fairly short overall itinerary, we're getting 3 days in the monarch butterfly biosphere between 2 different reservations. And that gives you a really good shot to be able to see different types of activity, because as I mentioned, it's really driven by temperature. And you know, the temperature doesn't vary that much. It can be in the 40s up to the 60s. And because you're at 10,000 feet elevation, the temperatures are fairly cool even at that far south, close to the equator. And these butterflies are choosing that because it allows them to use up the least amount of energy possible, because it keeps them in the window where they don't need to be too active, and they can basically just save their fat stores for the return migration in the spring. And hopefully you get a moment where you get to see something like this, where the wings literally look like stained glass against the sun that's backlit, being a backlight for them. And really, really amazing to be there. More shots of both guides and guests in this area. All of these are taken from last winter with groups that I led. And on the 4th day, we make our way to Valle de Bravo, and that's another really interesting town that has amazing ecology. And this is not a butterfly day, but we do get to see this really diverse habitat in this area and get to check out some waterfalls. And we make our way back through Toluca, and we head to Mexico City. And on that day 5 is when you can either continue your adventure and maybe spend a little bit more time in the surrounding area, and maybe you'll make it to some Aztec ruins, Tenochtitlan, or you can make your way back on day 5. And just to wrap things up, I just want to say a little bit about the conservation status of the monarch butterfly. You know, Natural Habitat Adventures partners with World Wildlife Fund, and a part of the ticket purchase does go towards conservation, and the dollar amount is pretty astounding. I won't say it because I'll misquote it, but an amazing amount of dollars has gone straight into conservation from passengers on Natural Habitat Adventures. And just looking a little bit at this particular butterfly, here's a graph, the area of forest occupied by monarch butterflies hibernating in Mexico. So this is not a population measure. This is not the number of monarch butterflies every year. This is how much of the forest are those butterflies occupying. Because as you can imagine, if you can think about that picture of butterflies on a branch, how do you estimate the population of those butterflies without disturbing them? So scientists use forest occupied area to be able to roughly extrapolate how many butterflies there are each year. And they have other methods as well, but this is showing from 1993 until 2021. I'll have to get an updated graph here. But what you're seeing is that this has fluctuated a lot, and there's also a downward trend. We're seeing a smaller and smaller area occupied by monarch butterflies, but the good news is that this is stabilizing. And recently, before we move on, so this is 2022 in July, the migratory monarch butterfly was listed on the endangered red list. So part of the reason for the decrease in the migratory population is the history of illegal logging. So these are some images of logging in Michoacan. And recently, these efforts have been greatly dropped, or they have been reduced. So this is forest degradation in the core zone of the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve. And as you can see, there was a lot of logging and degradation that happened between 2001 and 2009. And then a lot of conservation groups, the Mexican government, and the local landowners, the ejidatarios, who own the land, came together and started to combat logging and illegal logging in particular. And today, that number has greatly been reduced. On this graph, we're only showing through 2018, 2019, but you're seeing that the composition is really reducing the amount of illegal logging, and now you're just seeing natural causes of habitat degradation and a little bit of what we call sanitation cutting, which is a legal form of harvesting in that area. The other programs that have been put into place are tree nurseries, which World Wildlife Fund has worked to be able to do, and then also transitioning local communities away from industries that might degrade monarch butterfly habitat and seeing if there's a way to move towards sustainable practices, such as harvesting mushrooms, having a mushroom farm, and having a tourism industry, ecotourism, to be able to charge for admission to these areas, and those dollars help them support their families as well as maintain the health of these ecosystems. So here you're seeing ejidatarios, local landowners who are replanting some of the species that these monarch butterflies rely on for a healthy ecosystem. So today, the illegal logging in the wintering grounds has been greatly reduced, but in the northern range of the monarch butterfly migration, we still have some significant issues to address. And this is why we're hearing so much about plant milkweed, reduced insecticide use, reduce herbicide use, because those things have a huge impact on this migration. So this map here, put together by the Monarch joint venture, is showing essentially the migration route, and then it's also highlighting the corn belt. And that is a really high monarch production area. And so it's really impacted by operations that use herbicides that kill milkweed that the monarch butterflies rely on, and pesticides, which kill monarch butterflies, and as well as a lot of other insects. And so there are huge efforts being done to try and create no spray zones where the insects are allowed to exist, and to reduce our use of herbicides and insecticides in large agriculture. So one of the things that you can do is support small agriculture that you know is not using insecticides and herbicides, and there are a lot of local farms. And we can also support legislature that is advocating for a reduction in herbicides and insecticides. So a lot of the work and effort that we're doing today is not in the wintering grounds, it's actually in the summering grounds of the migratory butterfly. And so just to round that out, restoring habitat, these are a few of the ways you can get involved. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. Plant native milkweed. It's important to talk to your local nursery and find out which species of milkweed is native to you. Anything is good, but it's best if you can go native. And then you also need to provide nectar plants, because once these adult butterflies emerge, they need sugar, and that comes in the form of nectar. So they need to feed. And so they're no longer limited to the milkweed plant at that point in their life cycle. And this will actually benefit all of the pollinating species to be able to plant nectar plants. The other thing, and in particular, native nectar plants. Sorry for the aside there, but there are some ornamental species that pollinators do not pollinate, and they don't benefit from the nectar because they're not used to knowing that that is a food source. So it's really important to replace those invasive ornamentals with natives, plant some pollinator playgrounds. And the other big piece is limiting mowing. And that can allow some native species to reestablish, and it prevents the loss of habitat. And then you can support beneficial farming practices, use your dollars to support folks, when you're getting your food, to support places that are doing monarch friendly farming. And then finally, supporting monarch habitat conservation through any number of conservation groups. So I didn't leave too much time for questions, but I just want to say that you can feel free to email me, follow me on Instagram at Two Line Studio, and check out my website. When I'm not guiding for natural habitat adventures, I'm working for clients, and I'm also running the Northern Peatlands Project, which are stories about one of Earth's rarest ecosystems, our northern peatlands. And those are bogs, fens, you've heard them by many different names. But if you check out twoline.com/tracks, you can sign up and get some messages from me every month, and I'll deliver some peat into your email inbox. But just wanted to open it up for these last couple minutes here and see if there are any questions that I might be able to answer. So thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Now, before we start with the question and answers, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. So let's get to some of them. So what about South America? Are there monarchs down there?
Yeah, it might take too long to slide back to that particular slide, but there is a population in South America, and they live there year round. We even have a population in Florida that doesn't migrate. They simply stay there all year. And again, it's those kind of factors of avoiding parasites, food availability, and they can't tolerate cold. So anywhere they can survive year round and they're not driven away by parasites or other factors, they will continue to live there year round and not be migratory.
So what is the best time of the year to actually see the monarchs?
So if you're looking to see them in their wintering grounds, anytime that Natural Habitat Adventures has trips into the wintering grounds, that is a time when you'll have a chance to be able to see them. Like I said, depending on the temperature, the activity level might be different, and weather is unpredictable. So you can have trips that are in March, which is the end of the season, that before they start migrating north. And those March trips could potentially be the coldest trip of the year, just depending on what the weather is doing in that particular year. So it's a little bit unpredictable, but anytime that NatHab is running trips, they have done the research and know that is a good time to be able to visit. But you're generally looking at a window from January until early March.
Great, thank you for addressing that. So if I am coming on a trip down there, is it advisable to bring cash with me? Is that something that I will need?
That's a great question. You would definitely work with your travel agent at Natural Habitat Adventures to be able to take a look at that. And there are FAQs as well that really recommend what you need. But generally, if you're on a NatHab trip, food, everything you need is covered. And then if you want a souvenir, you can bring some, small cash for what you would like to get there. There are a number of opportunities to go to kind of local vendors, either on the reserves or otherwise, to be able to get some dividends to bring home. Yeah, thanks for the question.
So in the past, we've had some guests say that they've had pretty good monarch level activity in milkweed gardens. but in the last couple of years, they're not seeing anything. Is there a reason for that?
That's a good question. I've been here in the Adirondacks in this house for 3 years now. So I've seen 3 summers of butterflies, and I would say that one of those years was a small year, and there are so many things that could be happening. If there's a ton of food availability that year, if there are a lot of milkweed plants in a lot of places, maybe you won't see as many monarchs in your particular garden because they're finding food elsewhere. Or, perhaps the population overall is not doing as well. The numbers this last year were a downward trend generally. So there are just so many factors that go into it. I think the other thing too is just timing, that you might have a season that is warm early and the butterflies go through their cycle, and maybe just timing wise you've missed it. Maybe they are active in your area just at a slightly different time of year than they were the year before. So yeah, I think it's definitely incredibly important to pay attention. And there are a number of places that iNaturalist, you can sign up with an app on your phone and you can note your observations, which is really helpful because it gives it to researchers and tells them, hey, I saw a monarch butterfly in this place, and then they can use aggregate data to be able to learn roughly what's happening with populations. So it's a really cool way to participate and to be, and you're also able to see the full data set and be able to see, maybe fewer people are seeing monarchs this year. So definitely check that out. iNaturalist is a good one, but there are multiple apps that allow you to do that as well.
Will the descendants of monarchs who migrated south from, say, New England always return to there, or will they head anywhere north?
That's a good question, and I don't know that we necessarily have the exact answer to that. It's a tough question to study. So I think when we talk about the monarch migration, we talk broadly. And even when we go back to that map, if I can find it just by jumping back here, when we look at this one, so there's the blue area, generation 1, the green area, generations 2 and 3, the yellow and the orange. This is a little bit more gray than it seems. It's not as clear cut. Sometimes you can have 5 generations happen in this same period from April through September, all just in Texas or in the Midwest. Not every butterfly goes all the way. And I don't think we currently know, if the butterfly that makes the generations that go all the way to Canada is the progeny of that species, and the future generations, are they going to the same place? That would be a really cool study, and I can't wait until we've got the tech to be able to answer that one.
So if I come down on the monarch trip, will there be opportunities to observe other animals, especially birds?
Absolutely. This is such an amazing trip for any wildlife species. You have a chance to see some really incredible species. This last time we were there, we saw pygmy owls, we saw a lot of different warbler species that you won't see anywhere else. It's a great birding trip. We spend a lot of time with our binoculars taking a look at the other creatures that we might see. There are a lot of larger animals that you don't have a very good chance of seeing, but they do live in this Oyamel fir forest. A lot of anolis or lizards that live in this area. So it's a really wonderful wildlife trip, even beyond just getting to see the monarch butterfly migration. Thanks for that question.
Great. Sounds amazing. Unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to throw it back to you for some closing comments.
Well, thank you all for joining me. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to get in touch if you have other questions, or if you want to know more about the work that I'm doing with Two Line Studio. And thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday.
Thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen. or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.